The rope burned against Felicity Morgan's wrists as she was hauled onto the wooden platform in the center of Whispering Creek. The year was 1876, and the once quiet Colorado mining town had transformed into a place of judgment. "Felicity Morgan," announced Sheriff Wade, his voice booming across the dusty town square where nearly every resident had gathered. "You stand accused of aiding and abetting the escape of Frank Holloway, a known outlaw responsible for the robbery of the Western Union stagecoach and the deaths of two good men." Felicity's auburn hair whipped across her face in the autumn wind as she raised her chin defiantly. At 22, she had already experienced more heartache than most endured in a lifetime. Frank had seemed like her salvation 6 months ago, charming, handsome, promising her escape from a life of drudgery as the town seamstress. How could she have known his true nature? "I didn't know," she said, her voice wavering but determined. "I didn't know what he had done." "Ignorance ain't innocence, Miss Morgan," the sheriff countered. "You harbored him, you gave him your father's horse, you helped him evade justice." From the crowd, someone shouted, "Hang her with him when they catch him." Felicity flinched, scanning the faces of people she'd known her entire life. Now they looked at her with disgust, as if her love for the wrong man had made her equally guilty of his crimes. "That ain't how we do things here," Sheriff Wade silenced the crowd. "Miss Morgan will serve her punishment according to the law." He unfolded a piece of paper. "By order of Judge Wilson, you are sentenced to 6 months of indentured service to the town of Whispering Creek. You will labor from dawn to dusk, repairing what your actions have cost this community." The crowd murmured its approval of her humiliation. As 2 deputies moved to escort her from the platform, a commotion at the edge of the gathering caught everyone's attention. A tall figure on horseback pushed through the throng. The stranger's face was partially obscured by a wide-brimmed hat, but there was something commanding in his posture that silenced the crowd. "What's happening here?" His voice was deep, carrying easily across the square. Sheriff Wade straightened. "Town business, stranger, nothing that concerns you." The man dismounted in one fluid motion, leading his chestnut stallion forward. As he approached, Felicity could see he was perhaps 30, with features weathered by sun and wind, a strong jaw covered with several days' growth of beard, and the most piercing blue eyes she'd ever seen. "Punishing a woman in public seems like poor business for any town," the stranger remarked, stopping at the foot of the platform. "This woman aided a murderer," someone called out. The stranger's gaze locked with Felicity's for a long moment before he turned back to Sheriff Wade. "I'm looking for work and a place to stay. I understand this town lost men recently. I'm handy with cattle, horses, and a gun if needed." Sheriff Wade studied him suspiciously. "And you are Flynn Blackwood." He removed his hat in a gesture of respect, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. "I've been driving cattle north from Texas, looking to settle somewhere quieter for a spell." The sheriff exchanged glances with the town mayor who stood nearby. "We could use help rebuilding after the robbery. The mine's short-handed too." Flynn nodded, then gestured toward Felicity. "And her, what's to become of her? She'll work off her debt to society," the sheriff answered stiffly, "starting with cleaning up the damage to the stagecoach office." Flynn's eyes found Felicity's again. "I'll take responsibility for her during working hours. I've got experience rebuilding after trouble. Seems like you folks could use all the hands you can get." A protest rose from the crowd, but Mayor Collins stepped forward. "We do need the help, Sheriff. And it might be fitting for Miss Morgan to work alongside a man who knows an honest day's labor, unlike her previous association." Felicity bristled at being discussed as if she weren't present, but she remained silent. Anything was better than the public humiliation they'd planned. "Very well," Sheriff Wade conceded. "Flynn Blackwood, you'll report to the mayor's office tomorrow morning. You'll be responsible for the prisoner during working hours. Any attempted escape and you'll both face consequences." Flynn simply nodded, his expression unreadable as he looked once more at Felicity. For the first time since her arrest, she felt something other than despair, a flicker of curiosity about this stranger who had intervened on her behalf. As the deputies led her away to the small jail behind the sheriff's office, she heard Flynn Blackwood's voice one more time. "Sheriff," he called, "you got the wrong idea about her. Sometimes the heart sees what it wants to, not what's really there. Doesn't make a person criminal, just human." The sheriff scoffed. "You don't know the first thing about her, Blackwood." Flynn settled his hat back on his head. "I know enough to see that punishing someone for loving the wrong man isn't justice, and I reckon I'm the right one to show her and this town the difference." Felicity was locked in the small cell at the back of the jailhouse that night. The wooden bench that served as her bed was hard and uncomfortable, but it wasn't the physical discomfort that kept her awake. It was the memory of Flynn Blackwood's eyes when they met, hers, not condemning, not pitying, but seeing her. Truly seeing her. Dawn arrived with the jangling of keys. Sheriff Wade opened her cell door, his expression stern. "Your supervision has arrived," he said curtly. "Remember, this is your punishment, not charity. One wrong move and you'll find yourself in much worse circumstances." Felicity nodded silently, following the sheriff out to the front of the jailhouse where Flynn Blackwood waited. In the clear morning light, she could see him better, tall and broad-shouldered in a simple cotton shirt, worn leather vest, and denim pants. He wore his gun belt low on his hips, the mark of a man comfortable with his weapon. "Miss Morgan," Flynn greeted her with a slight tip of his hat. "Ready to get to work?" "Yes, Mr. Blackwood," she answered quietly, aware of the sheriff's watchful gaze. Flynn turned to Sheriff Wade. "I'll bring her back by sundown." Their first task was assessing the damage to the stagecoach office. The robbery had left the front wall splintered, windows shattered, and the interior ransacked. As they approached, Felicity felt the weight of stares from townspeople passing by. She kept her head down, shame burning her cheeks. "Ignore them," Flynn said softly. "People fear what they don't understand." "They understand perfectly well," Felicity replied bitterly. "I loved a man who killed innocent people." Flynn studied her for a moment. "Did you know what he was when you loved him?" She met his gaze directly. "No, I thought he was different." "Special? Then you've nothing to be ashamed of. Love isn't a crime, Miss Morgan." "Call me Felicity," she said impulsively. "If we're to work together for months, formality seems pointless." The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "Felicity, then. I'm Flynn." They worked side by side, clearing debris from the stagecoach office. Felicity was no stranger to hard work, but by midday her hands were blistered and her back ached. Flynn noticed her wincing as she lifted a heavy piece of timber. "Here," he said, taking it from her hands. "There's no need to injure yourself." "I'm supposed to be punished," she reminded him, though she was grateful for the relief. "Punishment doesn't have to mean torture," Flynn replied. "Besides, I've got my own reasons for helping you." She looked at him curiously. "What reasons?" Flynn was silent for a moment, as if choosing his words carefully. "Let's just say I understand what it's like to be judged for choices you didn't fully understand at the time." Before she could ask more, Mayor Collins arrived to inspect their progress. "Blackwood," he acknowledged with a nod, then barely glanced at Felicity. "The town council wants the office functional within the week. The stagecoach line's threatening to bypass us altogether if we can't secure their operations." "We'll have it ready," Flynn assured him. "But we'll need more lumber and supplies. See Webster at the general store. He's authorized to provide what you need within reason." The mayor's eyes finally fell on Felicity. "Remember your place, Miss Morgan. Your father was a respected man in this town before he passed. He'd be disappointed to see you now." Felicity felt the familiar pain at the mention of her father, who had died of pneumonia the previous winter. It was his death that had left her vulnerable to Frank's attentions, desperate for connection in her loneliness. As the mayor walked away, Flynn turned to her. "Your father, the town blacksmith," she said softly. "A good man who taught me to believe the best in people, perhaps too well." Flynn's expression softened. "Believing the best in people isn't a flaw, Felicity, it's rare and valuable." He picked up his hammer again. Let's break for food. Mrs. Peterson at the boarding house is providing my meals. I'm sure she won't mind setting another plate. I couldn't, Felicity protested. No one in town will want to see me in their establishment, Mrs. Peterson doesn't strike me as the judgmental type, Flynn replied, and anyone who objects can answer to me. The boarding house was quiet when they arrived, most of the midday diners already gone. Mrs. Peterson, a plump widow in her 50s, raised her eyebrows at the sight of Felicity but quickly masked her surprise. Mr. Blackwood, she greeted them. And Miss Morgan, please sit, I've stew and fresh bread today. As they ate, Felicity was acutely aware of Flynn studying her. What is it? She finally asked, setting down her spoon. I'm trying to reconcile the woman everyone describes with the one sitting before me, he admitted. You don't strike me as someone easily fooled or recklessly in love. Felicity looked down at her bowl. You'd be surprised how convincing a charming smile and kind words can be to someone who's alone. How did you meet him? This Frank Holloway. She hesitated, then decided there was no point in secrecy. The whole town knew her shame already. He came to have a shirt mended last winter. I was the town seamstress. He returned several times, always with some small repair needed. He told me he was a cattle buyer traveling between ranches. He was educated, gentlemanly, different from the men in town who have known me since I was a child. She paused, memories washing over her. He brought me books, talked about places I'd only dreamed of seeing. When he asked me to run away with him, I almost did. But you didn't, Flynn observed. No, I said I needed time. Then, 3 days ago, he appeared at my door in the middle of the night, bleeding from a bullet wound. He told me men were after him because of a business deal gone wrong. I believed him. I cleaned his wound, gave him food, and when he asked for my father's horse to escape, I gave him that too. Her voice broke slightly. The next morning, the sheriff arrived with news of the robbery and murders. They found my handkerchief with my initials at the scene. They knew Frank had been seen calling on me. It didn't take long to put it together. Flynn was silent for a long moment. You didn't know what he was, what he'd done. No, she whispered, but I should have. There were things he said that didn't quite align, the way he always had money despite claiming business was slow. I ignored them because she trailed off. Because you wanted to believe someone could love you enough to show you a different life, Flynn finished for her. Felicity looked up, startled by his insight. Yes, he nodded slowly. I understand that better than you might think. Before she could ask what he meant, the boarding house door opened and Sheriff Wade entered with his deputy. Time to get back to work, the sheriff announced, his hand resting meaningfully on his gun belt. As they walked back to the stagecoach office, Felicity felt the first stirrings of something unexpected hope. For the first time since her world had collapsed, someone believed her side of the story. Someone saw her as more than Frank Holloway's foolish conquest. And despite everything, that felt like the beginning of something new. Days passed in a blur of hard work. Flynn proved to be not only strong but skilled, directing the reconstruction of the stagecoach office with expertise that surprised everyone. By the end of the first week, the outer structure was rebuilt, and they had begun work on the interior. Felicity's hands grew calloused, and her skin bronzed under the autumn sun. Though initially reluctant to speak with her, the men working on nearby buildings gradually began to acknowledge her presence with nods or brief greetings. Flynn's acceptance of her seemed to soften their judgment, if only slightly. Each evening, Flynn would escort her back to her cell in the jailhouse, and each morning he would arrive to claim responsibility for her for another day. They fell into a routine, sharing meals at the boarding house and working side by side. Flynn shared stories of his travels, cattle drives from Texas, winters in Colorado mining camps, a brief stint as a cavalry scout. How did you learn to build so well? Felicity asked one afternoon as they installed a new window frame. Flynn's hands paused momentarily. My father was a carpenter in St. Louis. I worked alongside him until I was 16. What happened when you were 16? A shadow crossed his face. He died, cholera. My mother had passed years before, so I headed west on my own. I'm sorry, Felicity said softly. It seems we share the experience of being orphaned too young. Flynn nodded, resuming his work. It shapes a person, that kind of loss, makes some harder, some softer. You strike me as the latter. And you, his blue eyes met hers with unexpected warmth. I'm still figuring that out. As October gave way to November, the stagecoach office was completed ahead of schedule. The town council assigned them to repair the livery stable next, which had suffered damage in the robbery when Frank and his accomplices had stolen fresh horses for their escape. The livery stable belonged to Harold Tanner, a gruff man in his 60s who had been particularly vocal about Felicity's punishment. I won't have that woman touching my property, he declared when they arrived on their first morning. Flynn stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. Miss Morgan is working under my supervision by order of the mayor and sheriff. Your personal feelings don't change that arrangement. She helped the man who stole 3 of my best horses, Tanner spat. Horses I haven't recovered, Mr. Tanner, Felicity spoke up, finding courage she didn't know she possessed. I deeply regret what happened to your horses. I had no knowledge of Frank Holloway's plans or actions. If I could undo what happened, I would. The older man stared at her for a long moment. Words don't bring back stolen property, girl. No, she agreed. But hard work might help rebuild what was damaged if you'll allow me. Tanner glanced between her and Flynn, then grudgingly nodded. Keep her away from my remaining stock. I don't trust her near them. As he walked away, Flynn touched Felicity's shoulder lightly. That was well handled. I meant what I said, she replied. I do regret everything that happened. I know you do. His eyes held hers. But at some point, Felicity, you'll need to forgive yourself. The thought startled her. Forgiveness had seemed so distant, so impossible since her arrest. Yet standing there with Flynn's hand warm on her shoulder, it suddenly felt like something she might someday achieve. Their work at the livery stable brought them into closer proximity than before. The damaged stalls required them to work side by side in tight spaces, their hands occasionally brushing, their bodies sometimes pressed together as they maneuvered lumber into place. Felicity found herself increasingly aware of Flynn, the scent of his skin, the strength in his hands, the rare but transformative smile that would sometimes illuminate his face. One afternoon, as Felicity struggled to hold a beam in place while Flynn secured it, the weight shifted unexpectedly. She stumbled backward, and Flynn moved quickly to catch her, his arms encircling her waist from behind. For a breathless moment, she was pressed against his chest, his breath warm against her hair. I've got you, he murmured, and something in his tone made her heart race. Thank you, she whispered, reluctantly stepping away once she'd regained her balance. When she glanced back at him, his expression was unreadable, but his eyes lingered on her face with an intensity that made her flush. The next day, an unexpected snowstorm swept through the region, forcing them to abandon work early. As they hurried from the livery toward the jailhouse, the wind picked up, driving icy flakes against their faces. This is turning dangerous, Flynn shouted over the howling wind. The jail's too far in this weather. We need shelter now. Without waiting for her response, he took her hand and led her toward a small cabin at the edge of town. Felicity recognized it as the place Flynn had rented upon his arrival in Whispering Creek. I can't go there, she protested. Sheriff Wade would rather you alive than frozen, Flynn interrupted. He's likely holed up somewhere himself by now. The cabin was simple but neat, with a small iron stove in one corner. Flynn quickly built a fire while Felicity stood uncertainly by the door, shivering in her wet clothes. You need to get out of those wet things, Flynn said, rummaging through a trunk. He pulled out a flannel shirt and handed it to her. It's not much, but it's dry. I'll step outside while you change. No, Felicity said quickly. You'll freeze too, just turn around. Flynn nodded, turning to face the wall. Felicity quickly peeled off her sodden dress and petticoat, pulling Flynn's shirt over her still damp chemise. The flannel was soft against her skin, carrying the scent of him soap, leather, and something distinctly male. "I'm decent," she said softly. When Flynn turned, his eyes widened slightly at the sight of her in his shirt, which hung nearly to her knees. He cleared his throat. "I'll make some coffee to warm us." As the blizzard raged outside, they sat before the stove drinking coffee, an unexpected intimacy settling between them. Felicity found herself studying Flynn's profile in the firelight, the strong line of his jaw, the small scar above his right eyebrow, the way his lashes cast shadows on his cheeks when he looked down. "You're staring," he said without looking up. Felicity blushed. "I'm sorry, I was just wondering." "What?" He met her gaze now. "Why you're really here in Whispering Creek. Why you helped me that first day." Flynn was silent for a long moment, staring into the flames. "Would you believe me if I said fate? I'm not sure I believe in fate anymore." He nodded slowly. "Fair enough." Another pause. "The truth is, I've been tracking Frank Holloway for over a year." Felicity's breath caught. "What?" "Not as a bounty hunter," Flynn clarified quickly. "It's personal. Holloway and his gang robbed a bank in Austin where my younger sister worked. She was shot during the robbery. She survived, but..." His voice grew tight. "She was with child. She lost the baby." "Oh, Flynn," Felicity whispered, "I'm so sorry." "When I heard about the stagecoach robbery and the description of the leader, I knew it was him. I've been following his trail north. When I arrived in Whispering Creek and saw you on that platform." He looked at her directly. "I knew you weren't guilty of anything except trusting the wrong man." "How could you know that?" "Because I've seen his pattern before. He finds women alone, vulnerable, makes them believe he's something he's not. My sister was widowed young. She thought Frank was a cattle broker who would give her a new start." Flynn's hand clenched around his coffee cup. "By the time I reached this town, he was gone, but you were still here, paying for his crimes." Felicity absorbed this revelation, emotions tumbling through her. "So your interest in me was just pity, part of your search for Frank." Flynn set down his cup and moved to kneel before her, taking her hands in his. "At first, perhaps I was motivated by seeing another of his victims, but Felicity..." His voice softened. "These weeks working beside you, talking with you, seeing your strength and dignity despite everything, my feelings have nothing to do with Frank Holloway now." Her heart hammered in her chest. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I came to this town hunting a criminal and found something I wasn't looking for instead." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "Someone I wasn't looking for." The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken feelings. Felicity hardly dared breathe as Flynn's gaze dropped to her lips. "I shouldn't feel this way," she whispered. "After everything that happened with Frank, I promised myself I wouldn't trust so easily again." "I'm not asking for your trust right now," Flynn replied, his voice husky. "Just your permission." "Permission for what?" Instead of answering, he leaned forward slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. When she didn't, his lips met hers in a kiss so gentle it brought tears to her eyes. Unlike Frank's demanding kisses, which had always felt like he was taking something from her, Flynn's touch was a gift offered, not imposed. When he pulled back, his eyes searched hers. "I've wanted to do that since the day I saw you standing on that platform, refusing to break despite everything." Before Felicity could respond, a pounding at the door startled them apart. Flynn rose quickly, his hand moving instinctively to his gun belt before he opened the door to reveal Sheriff Wade, snow-covered and scowling. "Thought I might find you two here," the sheriff said, stomping snow from his boots as he entered. "Half the town's looking for Miss Morgan, thinking she'd used the storm to escape. As you can see, she's safely sheltered from the blizzard," Flynn replied, his voice steady despite the tension evident in his shoulders. Sheriff Wade's gaze traveled from Flynn to Felicity, taking in her state of dress and the single bed in the corner of the cabin. His expression hardened. "Get your things, Miss Morgan. You're coming back to the jail with me, storm or no storm." "Sheriff, be reasonable," Flynn protested. "It's dangerous out there and there's nothing improper happening here." "That's not for you to decide, Blackwood." The sheriff turned to Felicity. "Now, Miss Morgan." Felicity gathered her still damp dress, then looked to Flynn. Something passed between them, an understanding, a promise before she nodded and followed the sheriff out into the swirling snow. The walk back to the jail was miserable, the wind cutting through her clothes, but Felicity barely noticed. Her mind was filled with the memory of Flynn's kiss, the feeling of his hands holding hers, the revelations he had shared. For the first time since her arrest, she felt something bloom inside her that had nothing to do with shame or regret, something that felt dangerously like hope. The blizzard confined Felicity to her cell for 3 days, while the town dug itself out from under nearly 2 feet of snow. Sheriff Wade personally delivered her meals, his manner more disapproving than ever. "Your supervision arrangement is being reconsidered," he informed her on the 3rd morning. "The town council's meeting today to discuss it." Felicity's stomach clenched with anxiety. "Why?" "I've fulfilled every requirement of my sentence so far." The sheriff's expression was unsympathetic. "Being found alone in a man's cabin wearing his clothes isn't what the council had in mind for your punishment, Miss Morgan. Some folks are saying you haven't learned your lesson about consorting with men of questionable character." "Flynn Blackwood is a good man," Felicity protested. "He's done nothing but help this town since he arrived." "We don't know the first thing about him except what he's told us," the sheriff countered. "And your judgment of men has proven dangerously flawed before." She bit back a sharp reply, knowing it would only strengthen the sheriff's case against her. Instead, she asked, "Has Mr. Blackwood been informed of this meeting?" "He'll be there." Sheriff Wade's tone suggested this wasn't necessarily a positive development. "The council wants to hear from both of you." Hours later, Felicity was escorted to the town hall, where the 7 members of the Whispering Creek Council were seated at a long table. The room was packed with townspeople, their faces ranging from curious to hostile. Flynn stood near the front, his expression tense but controlled. When their eyes met, he gave her a small nod of encouragement. Mayor Collins called the meeting to order, explaining the purpose with businesslike efficiency. "We're here to review the supervision arrangement for Felicity Morgan's indentured service sentence. Recent events have raised questions about the appropriateness of Mr. Blackwood's supervision." Tanner, the livery stable owner, spoke up from his seat on the council. "The girl was found in his cabin during the storm, dressed immodestly. It's clear he's taking advantage of his position of authority." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "That's not what happened," Flynn said firmly, stepping forward. "Miss Morgan was in danger of freezing. I offered shelter, nothing more. Any impropriety exists only in the minds of those determined to think the worst of her." Mrs. Peterson, the boarding house owner, rose from her seat in the audience. "If I may speak, Mayor Collins." The mayor nodded, and Mrs. Peterson continued, "I've observed Mr. Blackwood and Miss Morgan daily at my establishment. Their behavior has been nothing but proper. And I'll add that the work they've completed for this town has been exemplary. The stagecoach office hasn't looked so fine in years." Several heads nodded in agreement. Encouraged, Felicity addressed the council directly. "I've served my sentence faithfully. The storm presented circumstances beyond our control. Mr. Blackwood acted honorably to ensure my safety, nothing more." Flynn's eyes warmed at her words, but his expression remained serious as he faced the council. "If there are concerns about propriety, perhaps a female supervisor could be appointed for Miss Morgan instead. But I would ask the council to recognize the progress we've made on the town's repairs. Changing arrangements now would only delay the work." The council members exchanged glances, and Mayor Collins cleared his throat. "We could assign Mrs. Peterson as an additional supervisor, particularly during inclement weather when normal working hours might be affected." Mrs. Peterson nodded her agreement. "I'm willing to take responsibility for Miss Morgan when needed." Sheriff Wade frowned, but seemed to recognize he was outnumbered. "If the council is satisfied, I have no objection to continuing the current work arrangements with that amendment." The matter seemed settled when the door to the town hall burst open, admitting a blast of cold air and a stranger dressed in the distinctive duster and badge of a U.S. Marshal. "Pardon the interruption," the newcomer announced, removing his hat. "Marshal James Harker. I'm looking for Sheriff Wade and the mayor of this town." The room fell silent as the marshal strode forward, his gaze sweeping the assembly before settling on Flynn. Something passed between the two men recognition, Felicity thought, though neither acknowledged it openly. "What brings a federal marshal to Whispering Creek?" Mayor Collins asked. "Frank Holloway," the marshal replied, producing a wanted poster from inside his coat. "I've been tracking him and his gang since they crossed into Colorado territory. Word is he was seen in these parts recently." Felicity felt the blood drain from her face at the mention of Frank's name. Flynn moved subtly closer to her, his presence steadying. Sheriff Wade stepped forward. "Holloway was here about 3 weeks back, robbed the stagecoach, killed 2 men. We've had no sign of him since." Marshal Harker nodded. "I'm aware of the robbery. What you may not know is that Holloway's gang was ambushed 2 days ago near the Wyoming border. 2 dead, 1 captured. Holloway escaped, but he was wounded. My sources indicate he might be heading back this way." A ripple of alarm moved through the crowd. Mayor Collins looked grave. "Why would he return here? He must know we'd be watching for him." The marshal's eyes shifted briefly to Felicity. "Holloway's been known to seek help from acquaintances when he's in trouble. I understand there's someone in this town who assisted him previously." All eyes turned to Felicity, who felt herself shrink under their collective gaze. "Miss Morgan has been in custody since Holloway's departure," Sheriff Wade said. "She's serving her sentence for aiding him, albeit unknowingly." Marshal Harker studied Felicity thoughtfully. "Unknowingly, you say? Interesting. The man we captured sang a different tune. Said Holloway had been planning the stagecoach job for weeks and had a local girl helping him gather information." The accusation hung in the air like a physical thing. Felicity felt her breath catch in her throat, unable to form words through her shock. It was Flynn who broke the silence. "That's a lie, Marshal. Frank Holloway manipulates people, especially women, to serve his purposes. He makes them believe whatever he needs them to believe." Miss Morgan was deceived, not complicit. The marshal turned his attention fully to Flynn. "And you know this how, exactly?" "Because I've been tracking Holloway longer than you have," Flynn replied evenly. "Since a bank robbery in Austin last year," a murmur ran through the crowd. Sheriff Wade's hand moved to his gun. "You've been holding back information, Blackwood." "Not information relevant to this town or Miss Morgan's case," Flynn countered. "My reasons for tracking Holloway are personal, not professional. I have no badge or authority." "Yet you appointed yourself supervisor to the very woman who helped him," the marshal observed. "Convenient," Flynn's jaw tightened. "I recognized an innocent person being punished for Holloway's crimes, something I've seen before." Mayor Collins raised his hands for quiet. "This changes the matter before us considerably. Marshal Harker, what are your intentions regarding Miss Morgan?" "I have no warrant for her arrest," the marshal admitted. "But given this new information, I'd like to question her privately about what she might know of Holloway's associates or potential hideouts." "I'll tell you everything I know," Felicity said, finding her voice at last. "But I was not knowingly involved in any robbery or murder. Frank Holloway lied to me about who he was and what he was doing in Whispering Creek." The marshal nodded. "We'll talk tomorrow, Miss Morgan. For now, I suggest doubling the guard on her cell. If Holloway is heading back this way, she may be his target either for help or revenge." The meeting dissolved into chaos after that, with the council quickly approving Mrs. Peterson as an additional supervisor, while authorizing the marshal and sheriff to take whatever security measures they deemed necessary. As Felicity was escorted back to her cell, Flynn managed to walk beside her briefly. "Don't worry," he said in a low voice. "I won't let anything happen to you." "You can't promise that," she replied, fear evident in her voice, "if Frank comes back." "He won't get near you," Flynn assured her, his blue eyes intense. "Trust me on this, Felicity. Whatever happens, remember what I told you in the cabin. My feelings haven't changed." Before she could respond, Sheriff Wade separated them, leading Felicity firmly away. The last thing she saw was Flynn standing in the street, his expression resolute as he watched her go. That night, Felicity lay awake on her hard bench, her mind racing. Frank might be coming back. The thought filled her with dread, not just for herself but for the town, for Flynn. She had no doubt that Flynn would try to protect her, possibly at the cost of his own safety. The idea of him facing Frank because of her was unbearable. Outside her cell window, she could hear the occasional footsteps of the deputies patrolling the jailhouse. The sheriff had assigned 2 men to guard her around the clock, not to prevent her escape, but to protect her from Frank or to intercept her if she tried to help him again. The latter fear was ludicrous, Felicity thought bitterly. She had seen Frank's true nature now. Whatever feelings she'd had for him had died the moment she learned about the murders. Her thoughts turned to Flynn. In just a few short weeks, he had shown her more genuine care and respect than Frank had in months of courtship. Flynn really saw her not as a means to an end or a convenient accomplice, but as a woman of worth and dignity. The memory of his kiss in the cabin warmed her despite the chill of her cell. For the first time, Felicity allowed herself to imagine a future beyond her sentence, perhaps a future with Flynn, if he truly meant what he'd said. But first, they had to survive whatever was coming with Frank Holloway's return. Morning brought Marshal Harker to her cell for the promised questioning. Unlike the sheriff's brusque manner, the marshal was professionally courteous, pulling up a chair and offering Felicity a cup of coffee before beginning. "Tell me about your relationship with Holloway," he requested. "Everything you remember, no matter how insignificant it might seem." Felicity recounted the story as she had to Flynn, how Frank had first come to her shop for mending, his subsequent visits, the books and small gifts, his tales of travels and business dealings. Did he ever mention specific places he'd been? Other towns, ranches, hideouts, she thought carefully. He spoke of Denver often, said he had associates there. Once he mentioned a cabin near a place called Eagle's Bluff, said it belonged to a friend who let him use it occasionally. The marshal made notes. Eagle's Bluff is about 30 miles northeast of here, isolated country. He looked up. "Did Holloway ever introduce you to any of his associates or mention names?" "No," Felicity replied. "He was always alone when he visited me." The only name he mentioned was a man called Decker, who he said was his business partner in Denver. "Decker," the marshal repeated, writing it down. "Likely Jerome Decker, one of the men killed in the Wyoming ambush." Felicity's hands trembled slightly at this confirmation of Frank's criminal connections. "Marshal Harker, may I ask you something?" He nodded. "The man you captured, was he telling the truth? About me helping gather information?" The marshal studied her for a moment. "Hard to say. Men facing the gallows will say anything they think might help their situation. But I will say this, the details of the stagecoach robbery suggest inside knowledge. The robbers knew exactly when the gold shipment would arrive and which guards would be on duty." "I didn't know any of that information," Felicity said firmly. "I'm a seamstress, not a bank employee or stagecoach worker." "Perhaps not consciously," the marshal suggested, "but Holloway is skilled at extracting information in casual conversation. You might have mentioned things without realizing their significance." The thought was disturbing that Frank might have manipulated even her innocent comments for his criminal purposes. How many casual remarks about town schedules or personalities had she made that he'd filed away for later use? Marshal Harker closed his notebook. "One last question, Miss Morgan. If Holloway were to return to Whispering Creek, where might he go? Who might help him besides yourself?" Felicity thought carefully. Frank was charming. He made acquaintances easily. But the only person I ever saw him speak with at length was Walter Jenkins, the telegraph operator. The marshal's head snapped up. "Jenkins, you're certain?" "Yes, I saw them having drinks at the saloon once. Frank introduced him as an old friend from somewhere back east." Harker was on his feet immediately. "Sheriff," he called, "we need to check on the telegraph operator." Sheriff Wade appeared at the cell door. "Jenkins, what about him?" Miss Morgan says he and Holloway were acquainted, if Holloway has been sending or receiving messages. Understanding dawned on the sheriff's face. Jenkins has been acting strange lately. Called in sick yesterday, first time since he started working here 3 years ago. The two lawmen hurried out, leaving Felicity alone with the realization that she might have just identified another of Frank's accomplices. The thought made her sick. How many people in this town had Frank manipulated? How extensive was his web of lies? Hours passed with no word from the marshal or sheriff. From her small window, Felicity could see unusual activity in the town deputies moving purposefully between buildings, armed men on horseback riding out in different directions. The tension was palpable even from her isolated cell. Near dusk, she heard raised voices from the front of the jailhouse, then the sound of boots approaching her cell. Flynn appeared at the bars, his expression grim. "Flynn, what's happening?" "Jenkins is gone," he said quietly. "Left town sometime yesterday." The marshal found evidence in his quarters that he's been passing information to Holloway for months. The stagecoach robbery wasn't Frank's first job in this area, just the first where people died. Felicity absorbed this with dismay. So Frank could know everything that's happening in town right now. It's likely. Flynn glanced over his shoulder, then moved closer to the bars. "Listen, Felicity. The marshal and sheriff are organizing search parties. They think Holloway might be hiding at that Eagles Bluff cabin you mentioned." "You're going with them," she guessed. Seeing it in his face, he nodded. "I have to. This might be my only chance to end this for my sister and for you." "It's too dangerous," she protested. "Frank doesn't act alone." "If Jenkins is with him, the marshals deputized me officially," Flynn interrupted. "I won't be alone either." Tears stung Felicity's eyes. "Please be careful. I couldn't bear it if something happened to you because of me." Flynn reached through the bars to touch her cheek. "Nothing that's happening is because of you, Felicity. Remember that. Holloway's actions are his responsibility alone." She leaned into his touch. "When will you leave?" "Dawn tomorrow. The marshal wants to approach in daylight." His thumb brushed away a tear that had escaped. "I'll come back to you, that's a promise." "How can you be sure?" Flynn's eyes held her steadily. "Because I've finally found something worth coming back for." The intensity of his gaze made her breath catch. On impulse, she pressed her lips to his palm where it rested against her cheek. "Then go with that promise, Flynn Blackwood, and know that I'll be waiting." A deputy called Flynn's name from the front office. He reluctantly withdrew his hand. "Mrs. Peterson will stay with you while I'm gone." "The town council decided you should serve the remainder of your sentence in her care rather than this cell." Relief washed through Felicity. "That's unexpected kindness." "Not entirely," Flynn admitted with a small smile. "I might have mentioned to the mayor that keeping the only person Holloway might target in a known location with minimal security wasn't the wisest strategy." The deputy called again, more insistently. "I have to go," Flynn said. "The marshal wants to review the plan once more before nightfall." He hesitated, then added softly, "Whatever happens tomorrow, remember what I told you. I'm the right one, Felicity, not him, never him." With that, he was gone, leaving Felicity clutching the bars of her cell, her heart torn between hope and fear for what the coming day would bring. Mrs. Peterson arrived an hour later with Sheriff Wade, who grudgingly unlocked Felicity's cell and transferred custody with minimal ceremony. The boarding house was quiet when they arrived, most of the regular residents having departed for safer locations, until the Holloway situation was resolved. "You'll stay in the room at the top of the stairs," Mrs. Peterson explained, leading Felicity up to a small but comfortable bedroom. "Sheriff Wade has posted a deputy outside and another at the back entrance. You should be safe here." "Thank you for taking me in," Felicity said sincerely. "Especially given the circumstances." The older woman's expression softened. "Child, I've known you since you were a little girl skinning your knees in your father's blacksmith shop. You made a mistake trusting the wrong man, but Lord knows you're not the first woman to do so, and you won't be the last." Touched by this understanding, Felicity asked hesitantly, Do you think Mr. Blackwood will be safe tomorrow?" Mrs. Peterson studied her knowingly. "I think that young man is determined and capable, and I think he has a powerful reason to come back safely." She patted Felicity's hand. "Now get some rest. Tomorrow will bring what it brings." Despite Mrs. Peterson's advice, Felicity found sleep elusive. Her mind conjured terrible scenarios: Frank shooting Flynn wounded and alone in the wilderness, the Marshall's party ambushed by Frank's remaining associates. By dawn, she was exhausted but too anxious to rest. She moved to the window, watching as a group of mounted men gathered in the street below. Even from a distance, she could identify Flynn by his posture and the distinctive chestnut stallion he rode. Marshal Harker addressed the group briefly, then they rode out, a cloud of dust marking their departure. Mrs. Peterson found her still at the window an hour later. "Come have some breakfast, dear. Starving yourself won't bring them back any faster." The day passed with excruciating slowness. Felicity helped Mrs. Peterson with chores around the boarding house, grateful for the distraction of physical labor. By mid-afternoon, the town was unnaturally quiet. Many businesses closed as their owners either joined the search parties or retreated to their homes to wait out the crisis. As dusk approached, Felicity's anxiety reached a fever pitch. The search party should have returned by now if all had gone as planned. The deputy stationed outside the boarding house had no information when Mrs. Peterson questioned him, only that they were to maintain their positions until relieved. Darkness fell completely and still no word came. Mrs. Peterson prepared a simple supper, but Felicity could only push the food around her plate, her appetite non-existent. After the meal, she returned to her vigil at the window, straining to see any movement in the darkened street below. Near midnight, the sound of horses approaching broke the silence. Felicity pressed her face to the glass, counting the shadowy figures as they rode into town. There seemed to be fewer than had departed that morning, but in the darkness, she couldn't be certain. She ran downstairs, ignoring Mrs. Peterson's call to wait, and flung open the front door just as the deputy moved to block her path. "Miss, you can't go out there," he protested. "Please," she begged. "I need to know if they found Frank Holloway, if Mr. Blackwood is safe." Before the deputy could respond, Sheriff Wade appeared on the porch. His expression was grave, his clothes dusty from the long ride. "Miss Morgan," he acknowledged, "you should be resting." "Please, Sheriff," Felicity said, her voice trembling. "What happened is Flynn." The sheriff's face gave nothing away. "Holloway was at the cabin, along with Jenkins and another man we hadn't identified before. There was a firefight. Jenkins is dead, as is the third man. Holloway was wounded but managed to escape on horseback." Felicity's heart seemed to stop. "And Flynn?" "The Marshal Harker took a bullet in the shoulder. He'll recover." Sheriff Wade paused, and in that moment, Felicity felt her world begin to crumble. "As for Blackwood—" "I'm right here," came a familiar voice from the darkness beyond the porch. Flynn emerged from the shadows, leading his horse. He looked exhausted, with a bandage visible on his left arm, but he was alive, beautifully, wonderfully alive. Felicity sagged against the doorframe in relief. "Mr. Blackwood insisted on reporting to you personally that your supervision will resume tomorrow," Sheriff Wade said, a hint of grudging respect in his tone. "Assuming the doctor clears him for work with that arm." Flynn's eyes never left Felicity's face. "It's just a graze. I'll be fine by morning." The sheriff cleared his throat. 5 minutes, Blackwood. Then Miss Morgan needs to return to her room and you need to get that arm properly tended." He nodded to the deputy and walked away, leaving them with a modicum of privacy. The moment he was gone, Felicity flew down the steps and into Flynn's arms. He winced slightly as her weight pressed against his injured arm, but his good arm wrapped around her waist, holding her tightly against him. "You came back," she whispered against his chest. "I promised I would." His voice was rough with emotion and exhaustion. "It'll take more than Frank Holloway to keep me from returning to you. Felicity pulled back just enough to look up at his face. In the dim light from the boarding house windows, she could see a bruise forming along his jawline and a small cut above his eye, but his gaze was clear and fixed on her with an intensity that made her heart race. "Frank got away," she said, the reality of the situation returning. Flynn nodded grimly. "He was wounded badly, took a bullet in the side. The marshal thinks he won't get far, but—" He hesitated. "Felicity, you need to be careful. Until we find him, you're still in danger." "I'm not afraid," she said, surprising herself with the truth of it. "Not anymore." His expression softened. "You should be, but I'll be here watching over you until this is finished." The deputy cleared his throat pointedly, and Flynn reluctantly released her. "I should go. The doctor's waiting at his office to check my arm, tomorrow." Felicity asked, unwilling to let him go just yet. "Tomorrow," Flynn confirmed. "We still have a livery stable to finish." She nodded, stepping back toward the porch. "Be careful walking back. Your arm will heal," he finished for her. Then, with a glance at the deputy, he added in a lower voice, "And when it does, I intend to hold you properly, Felicity Morgan. Remember that tonight." The promise in his words warmed her all the way up the stairs to her room, where she finally fell into an exhausted but peaceful sleep. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Felicity dressed quickly, eager to see Flynn despite Mrs. Peterson's admonitions to eat breakfast first. She was halfway through a hasty bowl of porridge when a commotion outside drew her to the window. A crowd had gathered in the street, centered around a horse-drawn wagon approaching from the North Road. As it drew closer, Felicity could see Marshal Harker sitting up front beside the driver, his arm in a sling. In the back of the wagon lay a still form covered with a blanket. "Stay here, Mrs. Peterson ordered, hurrying to the door. "I'll find out what's happening." Felicity didn't obey. She followed Mrs. Peterson onto the porch, her heart pounding as the wagon stopped in front of the sheriff's office across the street. Marshal Harker climbed down stiffly, then pulled back the blanket to reveal Frank Holloway's lifeless face. A gasp went through the crowd. Felicity felt a strange hollowness inside, not grief exactly, but the final death of whatever feelings she had once had for this man who had used and betrayed her. "Found him about 5 miles north," the marshal announced to Sheriff Wade, who had emerged from his office. "Bled out from his wounds sometime in the night. Horse was still standing beside him." Flynn appeared at the edge of the crowd, his injured arm bandaged and supported by a sling similar to the marshal's. His eyes found Felicity immediately, and he moved to her side. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. She nodded, still watching as the sheriff and marshal arranged for Frank's body to be taken to the undertaker. "It's really over then?" "Yes," Flynn confirmed. "It's over." The news of Frank Holloway's death spread quickly through Whispering Creek. By noon, the town council had convened an emergency session, to which Felicity and Flynn were summoned. Mayor Collins addressed them formally. "In light of recent events and the service Mr. Blackwood has rendered to this community, the council has voted to commute the remainder of Miss Morgan's sentence, effective immediately." Felicity stared in disbelief. "You're releasing me from my indentured service?" "We are," the mayor confirmed. "While your involvement with Holloway cannot be entirely excused, it's clear you were deceived rather than complicit. Your work these past weeks has made significant progress in repairing the damage to our town, and we consider your debt to society paid." Relief washed over Felicity, followed quickly by uncertainty. Without her sentence, what reason would Flynn have to stay in Whispering Creek? His pursuit of Frank Holloway had ended with the outlaw's death. As if reading her thoughts, Councilman Tanner spoke up. "Mr. Blackwood, the council would like to offer you a permanent position overseeing the completion of repairs to town buildings and subsequently managing maintenance. Your carpentry skills have proven invaluable." Flynn looked surprised but pleased. "That's a generous offer, sir." "I'd be honored to accept." Felicity's heart leapt at his words. He was staying. After the meeting, they walked together toward her small house at the edge of town, which had been closed up since her arrest. The autumn air was crisp, the mountains in the distance capped with snow that glinted in the afternoon sun. "So," Flynn said as they paused at her gate, "you're a free woman now, and you're the town's new building manager," she replied with a smile. "Will you be staying at the boarding house?" Flynn's eyes held hers. "For now, until I can find something more permanent," the word hung between them, full of possibility. Felicity took a deep breath. "Flynn, when you said you were the right one, what did you mean exactly?" He stepped closer, his good hand coming up to brush a strand of hair from her face. "I meant that loving the wrong man led you to punishment you didn't deserve, but loving the right one, loving me, would never bring you anything but happiness. If you wanted that, if you wanted me." Felicity's heart soared at his words. "I think I've wanted you since you stood up for me that first day on the platform. I just didn't know if I could trust those feelings after being so wrong about Frank." "Trust takes time," Flynn acknowledged. "I'm willing to wait for however long you need." She looked up at him, this man who had changed her life in just a few short weeks. "What if I don't want to wait?" Flynn's eyes darkened. "Felicity?" "I know my own mind and heart, Flynn Blackwood. I've seen you at your worst and your best. I've worked beside you, talked with you, learned who you truly are. If that's not enough to build trust on, I don't know what is." A slow smile spread across his face. "In that case, Miss Morgan, would you do me the honor of having dinner with me tonight? Not at the boarding house, somewhere just for us." "I would like that very much," she replied, matching his smile. "But first, I need to reopen my seamstress shop. I have a feeling there will be plenty of mending needed after all the excitement of recent days." Flynn laughed, the sound warming her more than the autumn sun. "I'll help you get the shop ready. After all, that's my job now, fixing things in this town." As they walked toward her shop together, Felicity felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in months. The shadow of Frank Holloway had lifted, revealing a future brighter than she could have imagined during those dark days in her cell. "You know," Flynn said thoughtfully as they reached the shop door, "when I rode into Whispering Creek that day, I had no idea I'd find my future here. And I had no idea that being punished for loving the wrong man would lead me to the right one," Felicity replied, her heart full as Flynn's hand found hers, holding it with a promise of all that was to come. 3 months later, on a crisp winter morning, Felicity stood in the back room of her seamstress shop, carefully adjusting the lace on her wedding dress. Mrs. Peterson fussed around her, pinning the last details in place. "Never thought I'd see the day," the older woman said happily. "When they had you up on that platform last fall, who could have imagined you'd be marrying the man who spoke up for you?" Felicity smiled, running her hands over the simple but elegant gown she had crafted herself. "Life has a way of surprising us." In the months since Frank Holloway's death, Whispering Creek had gradually returned to normal. The stagecoach service had resumed, the livery stable was fully repaired, and Flynn had overseen improvements to several other buildings in town. More importantly, the town's attitude toward Felicity had softened as the full extent of Frank's deception became known. The telegraph operator's complicity had shifted much of the blame away from her, and her obvious happiness with Flynn had won over even her harshest critics. Marshal Harker had returned to Whispering Creek once more before departing for his next assignment. He had brought news that the remaining members of Frank's gang had been captured in Denver, providing final closure to the ordeal. A knock at the shop door interrupted Felicity's thoughts. "Mrs. Peterson hurried to answer it, returning with Mayor Collins. "Almost ready, Miss Morgan?" he asked with a smile. "The church is filled to capacity. Seems the whole town wants to witness this union." "Just a few more minutes," Felicity assured him when the mayor had gone. Mrs. Peterson helped Felicity with her veil. "You look beautiful, child. Your father would be so proud." Tears threatened, but Felicity blinked them back. "I wish he could be here." "He is, in his way," Mrs. Peterson said softly. "And I believe he led Flynn Blackwood to this town just when you needed him most." The church bells began to ring, signaling it was time. Felicity took a deep breath, gathering her bouquet of winter berries and evergreen sprigs. The town blacksmith, her father's oldest friend, waited to escort her in her father's place. The walk to the small church was brief, the winter air invigorating rather than chilling. Inside, the pews were indeed full, with faces both familiar and once hostile now smiling in celebration. At the altar stood Flynn, his dark hair neatly trimmed, his blue eyes finding hers the moment she appeared in the doorway. As she walked toward him, Felicity remembered their conversation the previous evening after the wedding rehearsal. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Flynn had asked, holding her close in the quiet of her small parlor. "It hasn't been very long since everything happened with Holloway. I've never been more certain of anything," she had answered truthfully. "What happened with Frank taught me what love isn't. What happened with you taught me what love is." Now, as she reached the altar and placed her hand in Flynn's, she saw the same certainty in his eyes that she felt in her heart. The ceremony was simple but meaningful. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising not just love and fidelity but understanding and trust. Things they had learned were the true foundation of love. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Flynn's kiss was tender yet filled with promise, much like that first kiss in his cabin during the snowstorm. The church erupted in applause as they turned to face their community as Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood. The celebration afterward was held at the boarding house, where Mrs. Peterson had prepared a feast that would be talked about for months to come. Even Sheriff Wade offered a toast to the couple, his usual stern demeanor softened by the occasion and perhaps the excellent whiskey. As evening fell, Flynn led Felicity away from the celebration to the surprise he had been working on for weeks, a small but sturdy cabin on the edge of town, built with his own hands on land purchased with his savings. "Welcome home, Mrs. Blackwood," he said, lifting her over the threshold. Inside, the cabin was simple but perfect: a main room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen area, and a bedroom just visible through a doorway. Flynn had furnished it with pieces he had crafted himself, showcasing the skill that had earned him the town's respect. "It's beautiful," Felicity whispered, taking it all in. "Our own place built by you, for us," Flynn corrected, wrapping his arms around her from behind, "for our future." She turned in his embrace, reaching up to touch his face. "I never imagined I could be this happy again after everything that happened." "That's the thing about life," Flynn said, his eyes warm with love. "Sometimes the worst moments lead to the best ones. If Frank Holloway hadn't come into your life, if you hadn't been on that platform that day, we might never have found each other," Felicity finished. "I still can't believe how quickly I fell in love with you," Flynn smiled, leading her to the fireplace where flames danced cheerfully in the grate. "I knew the moment I saw you standing there, refusing to break despite everything. You were the strongest, most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. And you were the first person to see the truth when everyone else saw only what they wanted to believe," she replied. "You said something that day that I'll never forget, that punishing someone for loving the wrong man isn't justice. And then I said I was the right one to show you the difference," Flynn remembered. "Did I live up to that promise?" Felicity's answer was to draw his head down to hers, pouring all her love and gratitude into a kiss that spoke more eloquently than words. When they finally parted, breathless, the look in Flynn's eyes told her that their journey together was just beginning. Outside, snow began to fall softly, coating Whispering Creek in a blanket of white. Inside their new home, Felicity and Flynn Blackwood started their life together, building something beautiful from the ashes of a painful past, proving that sometimes the greatest love stories begin with the most unexpected circumstances. As the years passed, their family grew. First came Frederick, a son with his father's blue eyes and his mother's gentle spirit. Then Faith, a daughter whose determination matched her parents combined. The Blackwood home expanded along with their family. As Flynn added rooms with the same careful attention he gave to all his work in Whispering Creek. Felicity's seamstress business flourished, eventually growing into a proper dress shop that served not just their town but visitors from neighboring communities as well. Flynn's position evolved too, from overseeing repairs to becoming the town's master builder, responsible for many of the new structures that marked Whispering Creek's growth as the West developed. On their 10th wedding anniversary, as they sat on the porch of their home watching their children play in the yard, Felicity leaned against Flynn's shoulder and whispered, "Do you ever think about how differently our lives might have turned out?" Flynn's arm tightened around her. "Sometimes. But then I look at what we've built together, and I know this is exactly where we were meant to be." "Even if the path that brought us here was filled with heartache?" she asked. Flynn turned to her, the years having added distinguished lines to his face but none of the hardness that experience often brings. "Especially because of that. The heartache taught us to recognize true love when we found it." Felicity smiled, thinking of that autumn day long ago when a stranger rode into town and changed her fate forever. "You were right, you know. You were the right one all along." Flynn's kiss was as tender as their first, filled with the depth of love that comes only from walking through fire together and emerging stronger on the other side. "And I always will be," he promised. As the sun set on another day in the life they had created, a life built on understanding, forgiveness, and the enduring power of finding the right love at exactly the right time.